My name is Marcia Robinson, and we are recording an oral history with June Fening as part of the MUMories Oral History Project. This project marks the 50th anniversary of the Miami University Middletown, Ohio campus. This interview is taking place on November 11th, 2016 at the Gardner Harvey Library. Mrs. Fening, do I have your consent to proceed with this interview?
Yes, you do.
Would you mind telling us about your relationship with the Miami University Middletown? How did that all get started?
How did it get started? Well, my relationship with Miami really began probably when I met my husband-to-be, and that would have been in 1970. And when I was at his parents' home, one of the first things that I noticed was that my father-in-law, who was a professor at Miami Middletown, Colonel Ray Fening, he had students in his den, and I thought, wow. But Tom said, that's my husband, he said, oh, he always has somebody. And my father-in-law taught political science. He was involved in the community as a city commissioner. He had been a retired military in the Marines, and he really believed in his students. He believed that they had a great future, and he cared about them outside of class and inside of class. And so that was my first real experience in knowing about Miami Middletown. A few years later, I happened to see an ad in the paper. That's when they still put advertisements for jobs in newspapers, that they were looking for somebody part-time at the Middletown campus, and it was going to be in developmental education. At that point, it was a part-time job. We had twins, and I didn't want to be gone from them all the time. And they were looking for someone with a background in reading, which I had, and they were looking for someone with a master's. And I had my master's in guidance and counseling. So I went ahead and applied. I didn't say anything to my father-in-law. I wanted to keep it straight. And so anyway, I remember going for my first interview. And before that, I had taught in grade schools, and it had always been with the principal. This time it was different. It was with, I remember, Marion Piles, who taught English at the Middletown campus, and Cynthia Yang, who was math, and Donna Claren, who was zoology. And I remember I was nervous, and anyway, I got the call, and I got the position. And again, nervous but thrilled. And Miami was still on the quarter system, so I started in January, and it went, those 2 quarters. And at the end, that's when I had started the developmental education program. And we had started with tutoring, and they had some money to buy texts with math. And again, it was working with the faculty. And Marion Piles, Cynthia Yang, they really wanted this extra help for their students in writing and reading and math. And maybe I did such a good job that they decided that they wanted to make the position full-time. And after a lot of thought, I thought, I can't do it at this point in my life. So I reluctantly said, I can't do it. And I remember driving home from the Middletown campus thinking, oh, I'll probably never get to come back again. Well, like a year or two, probably a year and a half later, the person who took my position was working on their doctorate. And she was going to only be able to work 20 hours during that semester. And so they asked me if I would fill in the other 20 hours. And I did, and I was really happy about it. Then, because funding was always an up and down thing, they were going to have to cut funding at that point, so they were going to make it a 24-hour-week position. And so that director quit, and I took it again. And the rest is history. I did not leave until June 30th, 2012. Different people that I worked for said, I think you've had every kind of contract that this campus has offered. I mean, I had a 9-month, 10-month, and I was part-time, I was full-time, but I was always here. So that is basically my career. I started in developmental education, which then became learning assistance. And throughout the years, then I picked up academic advising, and then by the end, I was assistant dean. And at that point, what I did in advising was considered more academic, and learning assistance was more student affairs, so I ended up reporting to Dr. Rasbassen and Dr. Shorman at that point. So that's kind of the brief history of how I got where I got.
I'd like to continue with developing the program, starting with one part-time person to creating an entire suite of rooms dedicated toward that learning assistance. Can you talk about that process?
How did learning assistance start? Well, at the very beginning, there weren't even the remedial classes. There was no Math 007 and 007E and P, and there was no English 001 or 007. So we started with basic tutoring. And from there, again, it was in cooperation with the faculty. They worked very hard to get those classes on the books. And the idea was that the students could succeed if they had the background to succeed. We worked a lot with the students who were underprepared for college, students who really didn't care very much about school in grade school, middle school, high school, and all of a sudden realized that maybe they did need school. We also worked with a lot of non-traditional students. And so I think we eventually, it was Linda Watkins and I that worked on a Carl Perkins grant. And the Carl Perkins grant funded a part-time, we always started part-time with people, that started the reading, writing specialist, the math specialist, and the career planning piece. And Linda had her degree in counseling, I had my degree in counseling, and we totally believed in taking the student where they were emotionally, and then putting the academic piece there. And so we worked, and that's how we really built the department. And we had a lot of support, again, from faculty and administration, Dr. Bennett, Dr. Governanti. They all were a part of this building process because they saw that our students could make it and did make it if they had the background to make it.
We've had a couple of students, former students, speak to that emotional component you just mentioned, especially the non-traditional students. Is there any stories that you can tell us about, without naming names, of what it meant to that student and that their family, perhaps, to have an opportunity to go to MUM?
When I think about the non-traditional students, I kind of go back in my head to the numbers of women, and many of them were just going through a divorce. And they saw themselves as not being dependent on their husband's income, but knowing now that they had to make it on their own. And so the thing that they saw was nursing, because going back to when people read the newspapers, they all had ads in the Sunday paper for nurses. And so students thought, I will go back, I will get my degree in nursing, and I will be self-sufficient. And first, they really had to heal where they were heart-wise, before they really could get the ins and outs of the vascular system. And so very many times it took time and maybe an easier schedule than what they thought they wanted so that they could get their feet on the ground in college. And I remember a young woman, and she had 3 children, and she was going to graduate from the nursing program, and I had been with her on her journey. And she came into room 9, and she had the biggest smile on her face, and she said, "I am graduating tonight, but this afternoon I am signing myself off welfare. I have a job at Middletown Hospital, and every dream that I have is coming true." And so it was that's just one of many stories about how people made it through the 2-year degrees when is what we had, and not jumping ahead too much, but jumping ahead. At the end of my career, and I really consider it the capstone, was building the BIS degree, the Bachelor of Integrative Studies. That we always knew from those very early times in room 9, before we went on to room 1 and on from there, we knew that we needed a 4-year bachelor's completion degree. And I remember the summer that we were in a conference room on the Hamilton campus, and we had been on a retreat. There were faculty and staff, and we were all in there, and the executive directors at that point came in and said, "You're going to get the 4-year degree. Go ahead. The provost has approved it. It'll be approved at the state." And then the real fun part came, and that was building it piece by piece. And I felt really good about it because I knew from the ground level what students had, what they wanted, and what it could be. And that was just fun. And I can remember going and arranging the commencement ceremonies for the BIS. Well, the first year, the commencement for the BIS degree, and that was a really fun thing to be in charge of. I worked with Rod Nimps, and he was the perfect host, and it was at VOA. And I know he was looking forward to having it the next year, but fortunately, we outgrew VOA, and we were at Dave Finkelman, and then Phelps, and then we were alternating it between Hamilton and Middletown. And those commencements were so special because we had worked intensively with all of those students. We knew their families, we knew their hardships, and so we could share in their victory, and it was just phenomenal. I would come home from those, and I was just so happy. It was the biggest high ever. And you know, it was something that group of us had done, supported by administration. And you know, again, I know that the BIS has made its changes, and now there are tons of other 4-year degrees. And you know, but I think like we started with the Model T and we had to crank it, and now there's just all these different models on the showroom floor, and it's just all the better for our traditional and our non-traditional students.
Our classrooms are a place where traditional and non-traditional students can interact. Do you have a personal story from your family where you can speak to what it's like to have the 2 groups of students work together?
Well, just starting, my first 2 children are twins. And my daughter, she was really ready for college. And during the summers while she was in high school, she took classes both at the Hamilton and Middletown campuses before she went on to Oxford. When she was a senior in high school, she took Spanish 202 at Hamilton, so she had that requirement met before she even went on to to Oxford. My son, he wasn't so sure about college, and so he eventually thought, you know, I might give the Hamilton campus a try. And we lived in Fairfield. So that was just perfect. My daughter was going to Oxford, my son was going to Hamilton, and I was working at Middletown. So everybody had their own campus. And my son, he was, again, the one that was a little iffy on college. And when he did go there and talk, he met with Mike Smithson, who at that point was director of admissions. And Brian had been interested, my son, was interested in theater when he was in high school. And so Mike Smithson said, you know, we could get together the theater group. And Mike Smithson did. And Brian was in their production, and meanwhile he auditioned over in Oxford. So at the end of his freshman year, he left the Hamilton campus, went to Oxford, and 3 years later got his degree from the Oxford campus. So he was, again, a traditional student success story. But one of the cute things that happened, I kind of followed him real closely through high school, making sure he did his assignments and stuff. But I thought, you know, when he's in college, he's on his own. And so one day he said, it was one evening, he said, I'm going over to so-and-so's house. And he mentioned a female name. And he said, I'm going to go work on a paper. And I said, oh, is she cute? And he goes, Mom, I'm going to work on a paper. She is your age. Anyway, so that just reinforced to me the idea that the non-traditional students and the traditional students work well together. That it's not about relationships, about boy and girl or man and woman. It's about working on the project. It's about the learning environment. And so all the things that I had thought that the regional campuses did well, my own children showed me that they did well. The other thing, and I can remember our daughter was a business major, and our son, again, the theater major. And my husband said, June, what's he gonna do with a theater degree? And I was like, you know, if he learns to read, write, and speak effectively and solve problems, he will be employable forever. A theater degree is like a liberal arts degree, and he'll be fine. And he's been very successfully employed for the last 20 plus years, and he does training and development for a Fortune 500 company. So it shows that with a Miami degree, you have a job for today and for the future. So my own children really verified to me that all the things that I was telling everybody else's children were very true.
We spoke about the things that attracted you to Miami. Would you tell me, what are the things that kept you here? What made you look forward to work?
The students. I can honestly say that what attracted me to Miami and what kept me here was the students. There were some disappointments, some students that I thought, oh, I think they can make it, and they didn't. But even those students, many of them came back again and again. So I was fortunate enough to have a lot of history with a lot of students. And again, I felt at Miami Middletown that we were always doing the right thing, that we were caring about students and we were helping them get to their goal. I also felt here, and again, if you're spending 35 plus years at one place, you gotta feel that you're doing some different things. Again, we started with the developmental education and the learning assistants and building that staff. And I was doing the counseling because there was the emotional component. And then I took over the academic advising, which again students who are in the wrong classes usually are not going to be successful. And there was the educating the faculty about good advising, and they took to that really well. I can remember that for a while, my secretary and I did binders for the faculty, and we updated them every semester with all the changes. And they would religiously put those binders in the faculty lounges, and when they came back after summer or after Christmas, they would have their new pages in their binders. So again, it was the working with the faculty on the advising that was good. Throughout my career, I also represented our campus at the Interdivisional Committee of Advisors on the Oxford campus. And that committee, we made exceptions to the rules for students if we thought it was justified. And we also worked on a lot of policy. And that was a very interesting thing to do. For a while on this campus, I also handled judicial affairs, which was not my favorite thing, but again, we needed to do that to maintain the civility of the regional campuses. So throughout my career, I did a lot of different things. One of the things we also did was teaching. For a long time, I taught the study skills class, and I was instrumental in developing that class. Also, I believe now the class is called University 101. It was EDL, and now I'm going to get mixed up on my numbers, 110, EDT 110, EDL 110. Whatever, it was the universe, and we did go through some different numbering and catalog changes, but it was the basic university class. And I can remember Dr. Michael Governanti was really into that class, and he took a group of us, faculty and staff, to Pittsburgh, and we saw a school up there, and then we modeled what we had. It was only going to be a 1-hour credit class, but not for a grade, and it was modeled on what was going on at the University of South Carolina, their 101 class. So we did teaching, and we had in that the components of advising and personal care, and so that was a great class.
We have a group now called Miami Red. It's to mentor women and provide advice. You managed to come through and work up to being an assistant dean. Were there any mentors who helped you along that path? This was not a planned question, but...
Okay.
Or any advice you'd like to offer to future employees? And you can skip the question if you like.
No, just let me think for a second. I hate to talk too much without ever thinking. In the different jobs that I had at Miami Middletown, I don't think I had a mentor per se, like one particular person, but I talked to most of the faculty on campus. I interacted with most of the faculty and staff on campus. I was on very many different committees. Women's History Month, MUMories, a Student Affairs Talent Show. I mean, we did a lot of different things. I worked with a lot of different people. And I was fortunate enough to, when there was a different job, manage to have the background and the learning to make myself successful in that position. And so if I had any advice to give to a new student affairs staff person or a faculty person, I would say get involved in everything, because everything is necessary for the success of the student. And so the more different people that you make a relationship, whether it's on this campus or the Oxford campus or, again, any of the regional campuses, then the more that you can give a student and the more you learn for yourself.
Is there anything about the culture of Miami Middletown that you would like to see preserved for the next 50 years? To make sure we preserve that.
I would hope that Miami Middletown, and I know that now it's Miami Regionals, they preserve that care for students. I think one of the major differences is that when a student comes in the freshman class at Oxford, they're the class of 2016. I think at Miami Middletown, we never looked at the students as a class. We looked at them as individuals. And I would hope that that stays, that there isn't the pressure for the regionals to be successful in thinking that these students must graduate in 4 years or 4 plus 1 semester or 5 years. Because many of the regional campus students, in fact, most of them worked. And there were semesters that they needed to take off or take 3 hours. And we never considered a student as dropping out. We considered them stopping out. And I would say with students who work, despite the fact that now there are 4-year degrees, they're still going to need to do that. Their employer's going to say, I need you to travel this semester, or I need you to, or it'll be a mom that needs to do something with her special needs son this semester till she gets him in the correct school. So I would guess and I would hope that the regionals wouldn't judge themselves on a completion rate of 4 or 5 years.
That brings me to another topic that we've had in many interviews, and that is the dreams of the community that created the original request for a campus in Middletown. They wanted a campus that would provide opportunity for their children, but that would also reinforce what's special about the city of Middletown. Do you think in your time here that that interface between campus and community was maintained and fulfilled?
I think that when this campus was founded, I think people pretty much lived in place. And when I first came to the campus, ARMCO, which then evolved into AK, that's where people worked and lived. And I think a lot of the students that came here thought that they would eventually work here. Then some of that changed. People became more, instead of just the city, a more county view, and then maybe a more state view, and finally, all the way up to a global view. But I think all the time, this campus maintained great connections with the city of Middletown. And Kelly Cowan, who was a super teacher here on this campus and a super administrator, she has done, even after her time here on this campus, very much. She fell in love with Middletown while she was here. And she has kept that love affair with our community going. Many students who we had as student workers in our office, and one of them is Deanna Shores. She's given back 100-fold to the community. But they started with that love of Miami Middletown, and I don't think that will ever go away. So I think this campus has, It's a different view than what I think the founding fathers had, because life has changed in 50 years. It is much more global. But I think this campus always will want to be a part of the youth and the non-traditional students in Middletown.
Is there anything else you would like to add to the record for future viewers of this interview?
Well, you know, people would say to me, why do you always work in Middletown? Why don't you, I mean, you live closer to Hamilton? And there were times during my career that gas was more costly than others. And people would say, well, why don't you go to the Oxford campus? There are jobs over there. There was something about Middletown that I fell in love with. I didn't mind the drive. I thought it was great, really, because at the beginning of my career, I could put the kids and my home life over here, and during that drive, I could get out the campus. I could kind of compartmentalize my life. And then the same thing at the end of the day, and I think I talked about, maybe mentioned earlier, that I always drove a convertible. And on the way home, I could get rid of all the cares and the worries about the campus till the next day and start all over again. But there was something about the Middletown campus, and maybe it's that I fell in love with my husband, who was part of Middletown. I fell in love with my father-in-law, and he was a member of this campus. I fell in love with Miami for what it did for my children, and I fell in love with it for my life. And I loved my life's work, and I was really happy that I was able to spend it here.
Do I have your permission to discontinue this recording?
You sure do.